Alrighty, here we are in session 17. There's still people showing up. Just set up a little bit here. All right. We're almost at the halfway mark of this course. I think next week when we finish the chapter of Lot, this will be pretty much the halfway point of the course. So this last chapter, which is kind of a reiteration of content that he's already covered. Just a sec. Let me just turn on the light here. The room. All right, this chapter, which is sort of a reiteration in a different form of content that we've already sort of covered in the previous chapters from a different angle, is a very interesting chapter in and of itself. I read the section of for this chapter in Sadruddin Onawi's commentary, which is sort of a summary commentary rather than a full commentary. It's usually considered to be the very first commentary on the Fusus al-Hikam. But the word shab or Shu'ayb, which is a diminutive of the root sha'aba, which broadly means to divide or to separate. This root is associated with the concept of branching out or parting, which can extend metaphorically to refer to tribes, people, or groups. In a Shu'ayb is obviously the diminutive that has tasqiri form of this word, which means people, and as shab means people, tribe, or community. The diminutive form often conveys a sense of endearment, familiarity, or smallness. The semantic shift in the context is that while the root refers to dividing or branching, the name Shu'ayb itself does not carry this literal meaning in daily usage, although this kind of meaning can be derived from it. So what Sadruddin Qunawi says about this in his Fukuk I find very interesting. He derives the name of Shu'ayb from the meaning that makes it synonymous to the arteries connecting the heart to the human body, right? So since this chapter is the wisdom of the heart, the Hikmat al-Qalb, this is the meaning that Sadruddin Qunawi derives from it. And he says, since the heart is the source of divergence, from it emanates the animal life which flows into all parts of the human form, reaching and from there extending to all the organs, giving it aid or assistance, or giving aid and assistance to the rest of the body. Ibn Arabi sort of defines why he is labeling this chapter as such, but nevertheless, what Sadruddin Qunawi derives, I think, is a very interesting one because it's not immediately apparent from all the various meanings that we read about it in this particular chapter. And I find it very strange that the subsequent commentary tradition, whether of his student Mu'in-Din Jandi or Abdul Razak Kashani and his student Dawood Qaisari, are kind of silent on this etymology and this particular meaning. But Qunawi, very briefly, right at the beginning of his own commentary on this fas, on this Bezel, does in fact give us that meaning. Anyway, let's read this chapter now. The wisdom of the heart in the word of Shu'ayb. Just admit one or two more people in. All right, the wisdom of the heart in the word of Shu'ayb. He says, know that the heart, by which I mean the heart of the Gnostic, derives from the divine mercy, ar-Rahmah, but being more embracing than it, since the heart encompasses the reality exalted be it, and the mercy does not. This is alluded to and supported in tradition. The reality is the subject and not the object of the mercy, so that the letter has no determining power with respect to the reality. In a more particular way, one might say that God has described himself as the breath, nafas, from tanfis, which means to cause to respite or relief. It is also true that the divine names are, in a certain sense, the thing named, which is none other than he. At the same time, they require the very realities they bestow, which are the cosmos. For divinity, uluhiyah, implies and requires that which depends on it, just as lordship requires servitude, since neither would have any existence or meaning otherwise. The reality in its essence is beyond all need of the cosmos. Lordship, on the other hand, does not enjoy such a position. Now, please be very mindful of this point that the Sheikh is making. He's sort of said it in different ways elsewhere in the Fusus al-Hikam, but here, this is an extremely subtle but important point. So any relationship that occurs between humans and God occurs as a consequence of the emergence of divinity and the divine names, right? Al-Haq, the real, cannot in any sense be, in its totality or in its essence, cannot be predicated with even the attribution of divinity. It is beyond even the concept of being divine or being a God. So when we speak of the real or reality, that is where this whole transcendence issue becomes a very paramount one. But implicitly, what this argument is showing us is that the relationship between God and creation is one of relative relations, right? That are not absolute. So from this vantage point, once again, any kind of accusation that is thrown at Ibn Arabi and his school that they are pantheists basically falls out of the window, because Ibn Arabi is very deliberately underscoring that when we talk about the real, as the essence, of the unknowable, we're not even talking about God. This is beyond God. Any concept of divinity that we predicate of it is just, is at a lower level. But the minute we predicate godhood or divinity to the real, that is when all these relationships kick in. And that is when then we can talk about the God-human, God-world relationship and all the rest. This is a very important point. Then he says, the truth in this matter lies between the mutual dependency implicit in lordship and self-sufficiency of the essence. Indeed, the Lord is in its reality and qualification none other than this essence. When, however, differentiation and opposition arise by virtue of the various relationships, the reality begins to describe itself as the bestower of compassion on his servants. The reality first expressed the breath, which is called the breath of the merciful, nafas rahmaniyah, from lordship by creating the cosmos, which both lordship and all the names require by their very nature. From this standpoint, it is clear that the mercy embraces all things, including the reality itself, being more or less as encompassing as the heart in this respect. So much for that. Now, this appears on one level to be contradicting what he just said a few paragraphs previously. It isn't. It isn't in the sense that when he is talking the real eo ipso as itself, right? The mercy or the rahmaniyah does not apply to it. But the minute that these various relationships kick in from one perspective, then it can be said that the mercy also contains the real. Why? Because it is through the prism of the mercy, the rahmaniyah, wherein everything is perceived, including the real itself, from the standpoint of creation. So much for that, right? Know that the reality, as it is confirmed by tradition in its self-manifestation, transmutes himself into forms. Know also that when the heart embraces the reality, it embraces none other than it, since it is as if the reality fills the heart. Now, by the heart, we're not talking obviously about the physical organ. We're talking about a metaphysical organ of perception, which then raises a question here as to why Ibn Arabi denoted this chapter by qalb rather than fuad. Because in the Quran, in the Surah Al-Najm, the organ by which the prophet perceives God at two bows length or near is the fuad. Right? So at two bows length or near. And he says, Ma kadib al fuad ma'rad. The heart has not lied regarding what it sees. So in the diction of the Quran, it is not the qalb that is perceiving, because the qalb is, basically that's the physical organ. It is another organ behind the physical heart, which the Quran denotes by the term fuad, which is the organ of perception. But Ibn Arabi, for some reason, decided to use the attribute qalb rather than heart. And he says, by this is meant that when the heart contemplates the reality in its self-manifestation to it, it is unable to contemplate anything else whatever. The heart of the Gnostic is in respect of its compass, as Abu Yazid al-Bastami has said, were the throne, the arsh, and all it comprises to be placed 100 million times in the corner of the Gnostic's heart, he would not be aware of it. This is one of the very famous shafiyat, ecstatic sayings of Abu Yazid al-Bastami. On this question, Junaid says, when the contingent is linked with the eternal, there's nothing left of it, namely the contingent. Thus, when the heart embraces the eternal one, how can it possibly be aware of what is contingent and created? Right? This is a very important point in suluk, and it's a point that comes up constantly with people who initially get on a path and are repeating a zikr or doing certain practices or whatnot, and from one level they feel that they're not experiencing anything until very slowly these subtle things start to kind of creep into their consciousness, and they start to see or taste that they are actually experiencing the altered state. But what this point is trying to confirm is that even though we do not immediately perceive the fruits of a practice or the fruits of the practical elements of worship, nevertheless, it is happening. And the difference between the Amma, the generality of people, and the Gnostic is that the Gnostic is aware that they are not aware of the totality that is occurring within themselves, even though it is occurring. Right? So thus, when the heart embraces the eternal one, how can it possibly be aware of what is contingent and created? And this point also raises that then what is being experienced and tasted by a given Gnostic in itself is not the experience, the lower level experiences of a given Gnostic on the path. Those experiences, in a sense, are the real itself experiencing itself through the vehicle of that particular Gnostic who is on the path. Since the self-manifestation of the reality is variable according to the variety of the forms, the heart is necessarily wide or restricted according to the form in which God manifests himself. The heart can comprise no more than the form in which the self-manifestation occurs. For the heart of the Gnostic or the perfect human is at the setting of the stone of the ring, conforming to it in every way, being circular, square, or any other shape according to the shape of the stone itself. For the setting conforms to the stone and not otherwise. This is opposed by those who maintain that the reality manifests itself in accordance with the predisposition of the servant. This is a very another very important point, and he qualifies what he says here. This is, however, not the case, since the servant is manifest to the reality according to the form in which the reality manifests himself to him. Right? Now, just remember the whole mirror motif that we have been discussing in all the previous chapters. And this gives you a glimpse, a tiny glimpse in what Ibn Arabi is saying, is how the experiential dimension of theophany for a given Gnostic works. So when a given Gnostic is experiencing a theophany, a tajalli, right? In one sense, it is God experiencing that tajalli through that vehicle, which then what it means is that in the form in which the tajalli is taken is the form that which the real perceives itself. With the vehicle here, in a sense, being kind of a tangential thing in the background. And what this also instances in a very, very subtle way is how fana occurs, or how the perception of annihilation, fana, would occur to the consciousness of a given Gnostic. Now, this passage here, Ibn Arabi really puts his finger on what this looks like. The solution of this question rests on the fact that God manifests himself in two ways: an unseen manifestation and a sensible manifestation. It is from the former type that the predisposition of the heart is bestowed, being the essential self-manifestation, the very nature of which is to be unseen. This is the divine identity, or the Huwiyah, in accordance with which he calls himself in the Quran, Huwa, or he, or it, rather, in the way that I have been translating it for years. This identity, Huwiyah, is his alone in all and from all eternity. When the predisposition comes to the heart, there is then manifest to it the sensible self-manifestation in the sensible world, so that it sees him manifest in the form in which he manifests himself to it, as we have said. It is none other than God who bestows on the heart its predisposition in accordance with his saying, he bestows upon everything he has created. So that predisposition, that istidad, right, preparedness in the way that Chittick translates it, is already a manifestation of the deity, of the Godhead, of the real, right? So the form, in as we read in the very first chapter of Adam, the mirror, the istidad, the qabil, is itself already a manifestation, right? So what is being experienced in that locus is God itself experiencing itself, right? Even though we are the locus, we are the qabil, the receptacle, etc. Then he raises the veil between himself and the servant sees him in the form of his belief. Indeed, he is the very content of the belief. Thus, neither the heart nor the eye of the heart sees anything but the form of its belief concerning the reality. It is the reality contained in the belief whose form the heart encompasses. It is this reality that manifests itself to the heart so that it recognizes it. Thus, the eye sees only the credo reality, and there are a great many beliefs. So what did we say? The hidden treasure seeks to be known in every conceivable form of belief. So whatever belief that you form in your mind about the nature of God is basically God experiencing itself, knowing itself through that particular content of belief. So given this, we can say that all beliefs are true, and vice versa, that all beliefs are simultaneously false. They are true insofar that they are a specific locus of manifestation, right, of the hidden treasure desiring to know itself, but they are false in terms of being the totality of the truth, as what the Godhead or what the reality is. So then he says, he who restricts the reality to his own beliefs denies him when manifested in other beliefs, affirming him only when he is manifest in his own belief. He does not restrict him, thus does not deny him, but affirms his reality in every formal transformation, worshiping him in his infinite forms, since there is no limit to the forms in which he manifests himself. The same is the case with the gnosis of God, there being no limit for the Gnostic in this respect. Always, the Gnostic is seeking more knowledge of him, saying, O Lord, increase me in knowledge. Rabbi zadani ilman. And he repeats this in the Fusus 3 times. He says, Rabbi zadani ilman, Rabbi zadani ilman, Rabbi zadani ilman. The possibilities are without end on both sides, that of the absolute and that of relative being. When you consider his saying, I am his foot with which he walks, his hand by which he strikes, and his tongue by which he speaks, and all the other faculties and members in which they are situated, why do you make the distinction by saying it is all the reality or it is all created? It is all created in a certain sense, but it is also the reality in another sense, the essence being one. After all, in essence, the form of a self-manifestation and that of the one who perceives it are the same. For he is at once the self-manifesting subject and object of the manifestation. Consider then how wonderful is God in his identity and in his creation in his relation to the cosmos, in the realities inherent in the Asma al-Husna, the most beautiful names. And then the poem. Who is here and who is there? Right? Throwing out the categories of transcendence, eminence, awareness, here-ness, all of this is, when we talk about God, means nothing. Who is here and who is there? Once again, he emphasizes the point. Who is universal? Who is universal is particular. Whatever you say is universal is also particular, and he who is particular is universal. There's but one essence, the light of the essence being also darkness. He who heeds these words will not fall into confusion. In truth, only he knows what we say, who is possessed of the spiritual power, or himma. And what have we been saying about himma thus far? That this is the most important faculty. This is where theurgy itself happens. It's at that level of the intentionality, the himma, or the spiritual power, as Austin has translated it here. Then the Sheikh goes on. Surely in that is a reminder for him who has a heart, which is a verse from the Quran, by reason of his constant transformation through all the varieties of forms and attributes. Nor does he say, for him who has an intellect. God is not talking about people who are, who are intellectuals who've read libraries full of books. He's talking about another type of people. This is because the intellect restricts and seeks to define the truth. And note that in its root meaning, the word agal or agl in its form as agala in Arabic means to bind, and it has a synonymous meaning of to the word agda or agada. This is because the intellect restricts and seeks to define the truth within a particular qualification, while in fact the reality does not admit of such limitations, beyond all limitation. You cannot put any definition, you cannot put any limit to the real. So it cannot be grasped by any intellect. It is not a reminder to the intellectuals and mongers of doctrinal formulations who contradict one another and denounce each other, and they have no helpers. The God of one believer has no validity in respect to the God of one who believes something else. So it doesn't matter what the Buddhist believes and what the Hindu believes otherwise, or what the Sannyasin says and what the Yogacharin says, etc. These are all gods created in the beliefs. So whether you are worshiping Ganesha or bowing to the foot of the Buddha or whatever, it's practically the same situation. The supporter of a particular belief defends what he believes and champions it, while that which he believes in does not support him. It is because of this that he has no effect on his opponent's belief. This also, his opponent derives no assistance from the God formulated in his own belief. So these two gods are incapable of duking it out on a real metaphysical level. They have no helpers. This is because the reality has denied to the gods, plural, of creedal formulations any possibility of rendering assistance, since each one is restricted to itself. Both the one assisted and the one who assists are in truth the totality, majmu of the divine names. That's the second. For the Gnostic, the reality is always known and not ever denied. Those who know in this world will know in the hereafter. For this reason, he says, for the one who is possessed of a heart, namely one who understands the formal transformations, taqallubu, right, which is the zikr I got you all guys to say, the transformations, or taqallubat here, of the reality by adapting himself formally so that from or by himself he knows the self, or the huwiyah, the identity. In truth, his own self is not other than the divine identity itself, as also no determined being now or in the future is other than its identity. He is the identity itself. So whatever identity you associate to yourself, minus myself, ultimately, when we unpack the layers of what that is ultimately God. He, God, is one who knows, the one who understands and affirms in this particular form, just as he's also the ignorant one, the uncomprehending, the unknowing in that particular form, the restricted form, the human we're talking about. This then is the lot of the one who knows the reality through his self-manifestation and witnessing him in the totality of formal possibilities. This is what is meant by the saying, for one possessed of a heart. That is, one who turns towards the reality, or taqlib, is now turning towards, again from the root qalb, in all the diversity of the forms in which he manifests himself. As for the people of faith, the simple people of faith, who follow blindly the utterances of the prophets and apostles concerning the reality, not those who slavishly follow thinkers and those who derive their knowledge from intellectual processes, they are referred to in his saying, or gives ear to what God has said through the lips of the prophets. By this is meant one who gives ear in witness, indicating, and this is the important point, indicating the plane of the imagination, a khiyal, and its use, alluded to in the saying of the prophet, that you should worship God as if you saw him. For God is in the qibla of the one who prays. Because of this, he is a witness to God. It cannot be said of one who follows the thinker and is bound by his thoughts that he is one who gives ear. Since one who gives ears is also a witness to what we have mentioned. And since, as we have mentioned, such a one is not a witness, the verse quoted does not refer to him. They are referred to in God saying, when those who are followed will be acquitted of any association with those who follow them. The same may be not said of the apostles with respect to those who follow them. Therefore, O friend, realize the truth of the wisdom of the heart that I have set forth for you here. As for its special connection with Shu'ayb, it is because of its innumerable ramification, ta'ashub, since each and every creed is a particular path. Thus, when the covering of the earthly life is drawn back, everyone will see what is disclosed according to his belief, or he might see what is contrary to his belief regarding the divine determination. As he says, and there is manifest to them of God what they had not expected to see. Such cases concern divine determination. Such a one is a Mutazilite, one of the early schools of theology, who believes that God will carry out his threat to punish the sinner who dies unrepentant. When he dies and is in fact granted mercy with God, since divine providence has already decreed that he should not be punished, the Mutazilite finds that God is forgiving and merciful, and there's manifest to him of God that which he had not considered in his belief. As regards God in his identity, the Huwiyah, certain of his servants have judged in their belief that God is such and such, so that when the covering is removed, they see the form of the belief, which is true, and they believe in it. When, however, the knot of belief is loosened, belief ceases to bind the heart, and he knows once more by direct contemplation. After his sight has been sharpened, his weak-sightedness does not reoccur. Some servants then have God disclosed to them in various forms other than those first seen, since a particular self-manifestation is never repeated. He then holds this to be true with respect to his identity, so that there's manifest to them of God in his identity what they had not considered before the drawing back of the veil. We have discussed advancement in the divine sciences in our book of Theophanies, Kitab al-Tajalliyat, where we talk of those of the order we have met with in vision, kashf, and what we imparted to them on this question that they did not already know. The amazing thing is that such a one is always advancing, although he is not aware of it. This is a very important point, which I indicated earlier, by reason of the subtlety and fineness of the veil and the ambiguity of forms. As he says, it is brought to them in an ambiguous way. The veil, is not the same as the other. For similars in the sight of the Gnostic, those similars are also different from each other. So something can appear as something, right? But a similar is not an identity. This is also one way that we can refute the doctrine of reincarnation based on the philosophy of Ibn Arabi. That is because he who has attained to realization sees multiplicity in the one, just as he knows that essential oneness is implicit in the divine names, even though their individual realities are various and multiple. It is a multiplicity intelligible in the one in his essence. In manifestation, it is a discernible multiplicity in a single essence, just as the primal substance is assumed in the case of every form, which, despite the multiplicity and variety of forms, springs in reality from a single substance, is primal substance. He, therefore, who knows himself in this way, knows his Lord. For he created him in his image. Indeed, he is his very identity and reality. It is because of this that none of the scholars have attained to knowledge of the self and its reality except those theosophists among the messengers and the Sufis. As for the theorists and thinkers among the ancients, as also the scholastic theologians, in their talk about the soul and its quiddity, none of them have grasped its true reality, and speculation will never grasp it. He who seeks to know it by theoretical speculation is flogging a dead horse. Such are certainly of those whose endeavor is ori in the world, but who consider that they do well. He who seeks to know this matter other than by its proper course will never grasp its truth. How wonderful are the words of God concerning the cosmos and its transformation according to the breaths in the new creation in a single essence. He said concerning a portion, nay, most of the cosmos, nay, they are in the guise of a new creation. They do not understand the renewal of the creative command according to the breaths. The Asherites did indeed discover it for certain things, namely accidents, as did also the Sophists for the cosmos as a whole. However, the speculative thinkers dismissed them as all being ignorant. In fact, both the Asherites and the Sophists were mistaken. As for the latter, although they speak of the transformation of the cosmos, they fail to grasp the unity of the essence of the substance that assumes this form, that it cannot be created without it, form, while it, form, cannot be comprehended without it, substance. Had they made that clear, they would have realized the truth of the matter. As for the Asherites, they did not realize that the whole cosmos is a sum of accidents, so that it is transformed in every duration, since the accident does not last for more than one duration. This is manifest in the defining of things, since when they define a thing, its being accidental is evident in their doing so. Also, that the accidents implicit in its definition are nothing other than the substance and its reality, which subsists of itself. This is a very important point, and it also both affirms and denies the peripatetic doctrine of the arad, the accidents. As accident, it does not subsist of itself, whereas the sum of what does not subsist of itself is that which subsists of itself, just as the position taken in defining the substance that subsists of itself as also its assuming accident is an essential definition. This is just a reiteration of the standard Avicennan argument about the arads. There is no doubt that the assuming of accidents is itself an accident, since it cannot occur except in the case of a recipient, because it does not subsist of itself. It is essential to the substance. Having a position is also an accident that can only occur in respect of that which takes a position, it does not subsist of itself, right? So what he's saying is that every substrate, in a sense, is an accident, but by the same token, it's that substrate itself is subsisting by another, which is necessary being, meaning God. So from another point of view, one can say that even the term accident, in term, arad, that Islamic philosophy uses for these derivations from the substrates, is itself is wrong to even glean that as being an accident, as being something that is derived from a substrate. Neither the taking of a position nor the assumption of accidents constitutes anything additional to the essence, ain, of the defined substance, because the essential limits are nothing other than the thing defined and its identity. Thus, that which does not last for two durations becomes in sum a thing that lasts for two, indeed many durations, and that which was not self-subsistent becomes once again self-subsistent. All due to the true substrate of things, which is God. They are not aware of what they are about while they are in the guise of a new creation. As for those to whom the higher worlds are disclosed, they see that God is manifested in every breath and that no particular self-manifestation is repeated. They also see that every self-manifestation at once provides a new creation and annihilates another. Its annihilation is extinction at the new self-manifestation, subsistence being what is given by the following other self-manifestation. So understand. In other words, everything is in a perpetual state of fana and baqa, annihilation and subsistence. Everything is being recreated at every moment. And therefore, even these, logical and conceptual categories such as accidents and substance and all of the stuff that obsessed, especially the peripatetic philosophers and also to some degree the mutakallimun, the theologians who were following these peripatetics, in a sense, are complete illusions. Because what is coming into being and passing away are just basically the self-manifestations of Allah, of the real, al-Haq, at every moment. Anyway, that was the chapter of Shu'ayb. So let me pass the floor on to all of you. Questions, comments, revelations, insights, whatever you want. Anybody? Zechariah, go for it.
Oh, yeah, could you just I guess go over that whole thing with the those who haven't lent an ear when they were making the distinction between those who follow the prophets like blindly without understanding and those who follow thinkers, like that whole part kind of slipped by me. If you could just like
it's phrased very unclearly, which even Ari does with a lot of his own formulations. We have three categories of people in the spiritual universe, right? According to Ibn Arabi. There are the blind believers of the creeds, right? Who just, without having any experience or anything, just a basic run-of-the-mill religious, dogmatic, simple believer. Then we have the hyper-rationalists, right? The theologians, philosophers, etc., who try to over-rationalize the imagery and the symbolism of religious scripture to try to fit it into a more rationalist perspective. Ibn Arabi is saying that both these poles are a problem. The Sufis, or rather the verifiers, the people of blame that Ibn Arabi counts himself amongst, are those who are utilizing the active imagination to understand what the symbolism of religion and scripture is actually talking about, which is not the dogmatic formulations of the simple believer, nor is it the over-rationalized formulation of these philosophers and theologians, etc.
okay, so I guess like what I'm understanding is that he kind of I guess he lays more like using his own terminology, he lays kind of more, I guess, more forgiving or a better stance. Like he falls more on the side of those who just follow the prophets like the mainstream believers, and then those who kind of follow rationalistic theologians and thinkers, as he called them, people who are like who use only their discursive intellect to find the truth. As he reiterates elsewhere, that's a waste of time. Those people are like at a lower status essentially because it's not even their own thought. It's like kind of blind following of somebody else's, failed endeavor, I guess, is what you would define that as.
Sure. Just remember, one of the reasons why Ibn Arabi and many Sufis after him and before him criticize, this process of ratiocination or the intellectual approach to the questions of spirit is a very simple and very self-evident axiomatic one. And that is, the spirit is limitless. Reason seeks to limit. The mind seeks to limit things. In order to define something, you have to limit it. I mean, the word for limit, logical limit in Arabic itself is had, right? So when in logic or philosophy, when you're talking about had, usually you're talking about definition of something, but the word had itself means limit, right? So you cannot understand God, you cannot understand the spirit by limits or by definitions, right? Because these are intellectual constructions. They only have validity in a discursive plane of the mind alone, of the act, right? Whereas God, the spirit, the divinity is limitless. It has no limit. So how can the limited or that which seeks to define understand that which cannot be defined? So this is the reason for the criticism, and also the mind does not taste, right? The mind gleans. There's a difference between these two. The mind can maybe perceive the intellectual contents of what it's talking about. Usually it can to some very vague degree. But on the mystical path, when you are trying to approach the unlimited, right, that requires a completely different faculty. All these traditions talk about the wisdom of the heart, and the Quran is very explicit, that it is the fu'ad, which I usually translate or taking my cue from Idris Samawi Hamid, the blaze flux, because that notion of the word fu'ad has the notion of fluctuation in its definition, even though it means heart, right? But that is the organ by which the prophet perceives God, on the night of the Miraj at 2 bows length or near, right? So this intellectual endeavor, where it might have its validity on some level on the ultimate questions, and where God and the universe and the spirit and real existential questions are concerned, has no ultimate benefit. It may have a discursive element. I mean, like, for example, us reading books about mysticism, or us reading books about Ibn Arabi, us trying to get a very general ideational notion about what these people believe. But to experience, taste, though, what these mystics are talking about, what these people on the path, that is something else. I mean, my own sheikh once put it to me. I mean, he loved this book like nothing else. But he also said that even the Fusus al-Hikam can become a veil. If you try to intellectualize what is going on in this text, rather than try to seek to experience what Ibn Arabi is saying, the book itself is a veil, right? And this is what the intellect does. The intellect is constantly trying to define parameters, to mark boundaries and territory and all that kind of stuff in order to understand. That is its nature. But when we're in the presence of the reality, which is the container of absolutely everything that exists, it is not possible to understand it by these rational means. So a simple believer, although they're obviously wrong, and they just got criticized by Ibn Arabi in terms of the gods created in the beliefs, and the duel between the various gods of the beliefs that don't help anybody. He has criticized them, but by the same token, the other side is also just as much a cul-de-sac and a dead end in understanding the real.
That makes sense. Thanks. I do have another question.
Go
It's
for it.
it's like related to the next part, where it deals with like it's talking about the those who when the veil of earthly life is drawn back, and then the Mu'tazilite sees God as somebody merciful as opposed to what they expected, and
Mm.
then how does that, I guess, relate? There's a hadith Qudsi that kind of says, "Oh, I am." It's from I don't know. It's from narrated by Abu Huraira, I believe. I think that might be a problem if you come from a Shi'i perspective, but it does say, "I am as my Lord. I am as my servant thinks of me." Like that's how the Lord
Yes, yes,
is.
yes, yes. That there's a
So
very actually this hadith has another chain of narrations that occurs also in the Bihar al-Anwar. My servant occurs in his conjecture of me, or I occur in my servant's conjecture of me, of my opinion, zan. Yes, that hadith in the Sunni collection is attributed to Abu Huraira, and the Shia ones, there's other chains of narrations that validate that hadith. Um, yeah, I mean, Simon, this is what he just got finished telling us, that in every form of belief, that tajalli, that self-disclosure of God is occurring. So even in, if you think, have the most outlandish view of what God is present in that form. But simultaneously, it is present in its opposite as well.
yeah, that's the kind of the mind blowing thing, because you have like these two, they're like at odds with each other, because then I guess maybe in this case, it went to the opposite. I guess maybe that has to do with the mercy, because if it went to what he was expecting, it would have been worse for him in the long. Like obviously, he would have been like that sort of rationalistic,
Mm.
perfectly just God is just gonna like nobody's really gonna do well under that circumstance. So I guess it's interesting that in that way. So
Now,
yeah, I mean that.
just remember what Ibn Arabi has been saying, that, and he says this several times throughout the Futuhat al-Makkiyah when he's discussing these issues, is that when we have that famous hadith, my mercy precedes my wrath, right? He got through in a couple of chapters ago that we read that wrath, is an accident, an arath, right? So that means that, and especially if you follow any form of peripatetic Islamic philosophy, a accident is always a temporary thing. Has a locus in time, comes into being, passes out, right? So what does that say about the nature of God? Is that it is temporary. Then, therefore, my mercy precedes my wrath, which in essence then makes wrath a accident of mercy.
Yeah, that makes sense, and from the perspective of the example he used, from what I recall, the Mu'tazila used to believe that whoever commits a major sin leaves Islam completely, and they have to like take the Shahada again. So
Yeah.
it was a very sort of like that kind of that definitely needs mercy added onto it, because it's kind of pretty harsh. But yeah, those are my questions for now. If I think of any
Well, I
more,
mean,
I'll
you
let you.
know, I don't know if you guys noticed, I passed a fatwa against Andrew Tate this week, right? And there was all these Salafists on Twitter who were having a cow at my fatwa. And who are you? Whose authority? You, us, not even Qom or Najaf consider you whatever. If you read the text of what I wrote, my fatwa against Andrew Tate, I didn't say he was out of Islam, because I don't believe anybody can actually necessarily leave Islam, because I don't take Islam as a noun, but as a verb. I said that this man is an unbeliever, right? And by that definition, he's a kafir and a mushrik. Why? Is because a person, I mean, despite the fact the guy's a sex trafficker and all the rest of that, but he incited a riot against an innocent immigrant community in the UK, right? That he professes to be a part of, right? By boosting these racist, divisive arguments about Muslims that, these shills like Tommy Robinson, etc., are pushing on social media all the time, that victimize just innocent families. We're not talking about even activists, just innocent families, people go, trying to live their lives, raise their kids without harm or anything. And these were the people that were targeted by this nonsense of Andrew Tate and his friend, Tommy Robinson. And so if this guy has made the Shahada and claims to be a Muslim, by the definition of his actions, he has defined himself as being a kafir being not just an infidel. I mean, this is usually how it gets translated into English. A kafir is someone who is covering the truth. By Mr. Andrew Tate going on his Twitter feed and posting and boosting these completely racist, anti-refugee, anti-immigration arguments about a community that he's claiming to be associated with, he is pushing a lie about his own belief, right? And his own belief is that the meek, individual, average people, families, going about their lives, raising their kids, going to work, paying the bills, etc., etc. These people should not be victimized by the political games of a bunch of far-right morons and red pill, parasites like this guy, right? So I declared this guy to be a kafir based on that definition that I'm giving you. So my fatwa is actually an Akbarian fatwa against Andrew Tate. It is not a al-Azhari or a Najafi or a Qawmi, an Usuli or whatever kind of fatwa. I'm basing my fatwa on the fiqh, if one can call it that, of the Fusus al-Hikam, right? If you victimize people, if you get on this political trek that Mr. Tate got on while claiming to be a Muslim, and you do this sort of thing, okay, sure, you're a Muslim, but you're not a believer. You're not a mu'min. A mu'min, there are other things associated, and even when you read the text of the Quran, between a submitter, a Muslim, and a mu'min, a believer, right? The ethics of a believer are very different than even the ethics of a Muslim. We get these distinctions made in the Shia Hadith very markedly. The Imams, peace be upon them, made these distinctions between the Muslimun and the Mu'minun, the Amma and the Khasa, right? So my fatwa, despite the claims of some of these, these Salafi dawa bros of Twitter, was a takfir, but from a completely different perspective of what takfir is, right? So that is where I came from. And that's my explanation of what this hadith is about. You commit these you victimize innocent people, the meek, then you are a kafir, based on this definition of what I just presented. So this is different. What I'm doing, for example, is very different than what the Mu'tazilite says in terms of what a sin is, right? A sin to a Mu'tazilite has an ontological reality, whereas in this perspective, nothing possesses an ontological reality other than the reality of God, right? And such that even when, for example, in the text of my fatwa, when I say that this guy is one of the this Mr. Andrew Tate is one of the spawns of the devil, well, we know from the Akbarian perspective that the devil himself is the manifestation of the name of God Mudil, the one who misguides, right? So my takfir does not necessarily place someone outside of the pale of Islam. It places someone, as the text is very explicit, it places someone outside of the pale of Iman. And this can happen if you take these Akbarian categories and apply them, in these, kind of juridical kind of rulings. So I have made an Akbarian ruling, saying this guy's okay, this guy can be a Muslim, but he's not a mu'min. Because a mu'min comes with a tool set of ethical things. A mu'min is constantly engaging in takhalluq bi akhlaqillah. And takhalluq bi akhlaqillah, taking on the character traits of God, doesn't go on Twitter and social media and victimizes the very community that they claim to belong to, because of, their reputation and their whole, the far right subculture that they belong to, that sort of thing. So this is the difference, if, Sufis and people of my ilk can also, talk about damnation and wrath and, all that kind of stuff, we can still condemn. But when we do that, it's very different than when the theologians do that, because the theologians are inhabiting a very dualistic, and very sharp boundaried kind of universe, ontological one, where even their ontology is not very clear at all. What are the demarcations? I'm saying everything is inhabiting the reality of God, but performance is the difference between being aware or unaware, right? So if you are truly a moment rather than just a submitter, then you are taking on the character traits of God. You don't do this sort of thing. So then my action, my fatwa, in a sense, is also then performing a duty that the Quran itself is telling every genuine Muslim and woman to do, and that's amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar, to enjoin the good and to denounce the evil. So all these Salafists and whatever at a real cow, I mean, especially the couple of these Saudi Wahhabis, who have no problems, declaring all Shia and Sufi to be kuffar, but when it comes to their red pill brother who they're boosting on social media, this Mr. Andrew Tate, you have no authority to takfir this guy, you should go to jail for making issue. You're like ISIS, etc., etc. Right? This is the difference between when Sufis do these things and where these Salafists and Wahhabis and their fellow travelers, etc., do these sorts of things. We're coming at this question from a metaphysical perspective. They're coming at it from their whatever they're coming from it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think I guess maybe like to make an esoteric commentary on like this person in particular, because I've never liked him, but like I'm aware of him, and at one point he was the most popular person like on the internet, like everyone knew about him. So when you just said that he manifests the name of like to misguide, like in an alternate universe he could have guided so many people. It's just funny that it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's his nafs,
Yeah, it was funny seeing Piers Morgan
eviscerated,
holding to moral accountability.
Yeah.
For Muslims. That's funny.
Yeah, it did.
And
I don't like Piers Morgan one bit at all.
Yeah.
So,
can I ask a question, or would someone
Sure.
else like to go? I can wait.
Go
Is
ahead.
there
That's
anyone?
your question.
Okay. So I'm thinking about this that line of I am as my servant thinks I am.
Yes.
Which I really like because, as you know, I like to sort of scrutinize people's near-death experiences, and there's that whole phenomenon of people seeing what they think God is, right?
Yeah.
So the Christians see Jesus and all that kind of thing. So that translates in that mind carries across, right? Like beyond the body. And so I'm trying to, I guess, distinguish between this idea of fuad and mind, because I thought when you said fuad that you mean like consciousness, the soul, right? That which carries that which goes on. And so I'll ask you to sort of expand on that for me. I note that when people recall the sort of data that they inherit from previous memories, which is, as you know, my sort of Gnostic knowledge of reincarnation, is that we're not transmigrating literally as one entity. We're inheriting memory that's already been written.
Yeah, sure.
And so I note that when people bring forth their experiences, they just have memory. They don't have an intellectual contextualization of the beliefs from their previous life. They don't come through with so you can see the difference there, right? And so that gives me encouragement, I guess, with what it's like an affirmation of what you're saying, that these intellectual constructs that all differ so much that we build, through different religions or whatever, they don't really carry. There's something more fundamental that carries. And of course, just as an aside, my frustration with with Western rational materialists that believe that the intellect is the route to understanding. So, they've read the Quran, therefore they are an expert now, or whatever, or they've read this book about a tribe somewhere. They don't understand like lived or non-verbal, non-language experience. So everything is trapped within language, which is kind of a a cornering that happened with Western academia, you know. So I'm trying to understand this. Like it's very difficult to think of something beyond mind, you know, as the way of experiencing God, because it does seem that mind is what is persisting after death. And there's like in Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis on where mind is when we die and everything. And even they acknowledge it when you're going through the bardo that it's mind, you know, still. So can you?
Have you got? I mean, have you got the next couple of years? We can argue this every week. But I will give you.
So I guess I'm more interested in the definition of the fuad as
the definition of a fuad. The best treatment of fuad that I have read in the last 30 years was the introductory part of Idris Samawi Hamid's PhD dissertation on Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsai. He really unpacks this word in its both in its ancient etymology and in its various philosophical usages, and its Quranic and scriptural usage, and then into the philosophical tradition. So fuad, with the way that Idris unpacks it, is the organ is the inner heart, the inner heart. It's the eye. We can call it the eye of the heart. Okay. And a notion of flux, it fluctuates. So what Ibn Arabi means by takallub, you know, or something that is in a state of muqallab or transformation, the word fuad in itself already has that meaning contained in it. So that fluctuation, that it's fluxing, that it's perceiving the transformations that are happening at every instant. That is very basic to the notion of fuad. And so the prophet, you know, the prophet perceived God on the night of the Miraj, not with the qalb. Otherwise, the Quran would have said so. He perceived God at two bowls length or near through the fuad, through that eye of the heart. So the spirit of the heart is another way to translate the or at least to glean or gloss the concept of fuad.
It sounds like just the pure, like the consciousness of the soul, or
it's the consciousness, it's the soul, it's the spirit, it's the whole kit and caboodle, but as a conscious entity, and as a visionary organ, if you would. And it's sin aesthetic. This is something that some of the conversations that Idris and I used to have, and he actually liked this word, and it comes from the word of psychedelics, obviously, sin aesthetic. So that where all sensations, as it were, become a single thing. So you are hearing with your eye, seeing with your ear, you know, intellecting with your taste, as it were. These are synesthetic things that people who have experience of psychedelics, for example, know very well. And what the fuad perceives is synesthetic.
Okay. And can I get
interesting about this chapter that he puts is because this particular chapter has a lot of different suluki implications. You know, he answers very subtly the kind of questions that a lot of people have about, you know, the experience of a practice. Like, for example, if you take a name or dhikr or something, and one part of your rational mind is just like going through the motions. I'm not feeling anything. My back hurts. I'm not experiencing anything. Then your mind wanders to other things. What Ibn Arabi is kind of implicitly kind of showing that when you are deliberately engaging in a practice, you know, these sayings of the Sufis like Abu Yazid can actually be employed to explain your situation, and that there is actually something going on. What you're not feeling is due to the fact that, you know, when the finite and the infinite start to intersect on some kind of a level within a given vehicle, it is very natural for the finite not to even perceive where the infinite is in its own experiential dimension. But infinite is there. Even if you're, you know, some level of your rational discursive mind is not picking it up, or even below that, the animalistic mind is not picking it up.
Is that on a parallel with the concept of Shiva as a sort of nothingness beyond mind, or am I barking up the wrong
Yeah,
tree
if we
there?
don't reify that concept, I don't, to tell you the truth, I think some of these Hindu Buddhist categories, unless one goes to the original text themselves and unpacks them from their original definitions and then the more philosophical definition, the way they are articulated in the popular diction of popular spirituality today, I've lost the greater implications of these meanings. People don't really know what these definitions are when they employ them. That's why I like, where someone like Ibn Arabi is coming from, because he takes the entire toolbox of the Platonic Aristotelian jargon that Islamic philosophy inherited, but then simultaneously, as he uses it, he unpacks it and deconstructs it completely.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, if I can
Go for
go
it.
back to a point previous, it was I think Zachariah's first question, and this goes back to this epistemological problem. My tendency is to push back against the idea that for Ibn al-Arabi, if I understand you correctly, that both the ordinary believer and the the rationalist theologian or philosopher they're both kind of on the same level, in that they're both missing the infinite theophanies, that reality. I mean, I think that's true, but my understanding of him is that he actually thinks that the the ordinary believer has an advantage over the rationalist and the theologian, and in that sense, he's reversing the perspective of al-Farabi and Ibn
Yes.
Sina, for whom the ordinary believer is just dealing with, like, for them, the Quran is like philosophy for stupid people.
Yeah.
Right? But Ibn Arabi reverses it
Yeah.
because, and I think this, when we get to the epistemology, it's because for him, imagination is somehow superior,
Yes.
because it deals in symbols.
Yes.
Um,
But
so
what you're saying is correct, 100% correct. The difference is what implicitly Ibn Arabi is saying is he's on the one hand equating the rationalists and the simple believers on one level, but then on another level, he's implying that perhaps the simple believer has an advantage over the rationalist and the philosopher, but only insofar as the simple believer has the possibility of entering the stream of practice of what the Sufis are doing, to enter that realm of imagination, to glean these imaginal forms and theophanies, etc. Whereas with the philosopher and the theologian, the rationalists, they're lost. They are limiting everything, and they're defining everything by virtue of these illusory intellectual constructions and definitions that then they, back and forth between one figure and another figure, and even the same figure in one lifetime change and are not grasping at the total picture. So in that sense, you're correct. He's giving an advantage to the simple believer insofar as the simple believer has the possibility of entering that stream of the imagination. But if they haven't entered it, just remember, he is saying that these simple believers are still performing taqlid. They're emulating. And Ibn Arabi is extremely critical of emulation, this blind, dogmatic emulation of a form. But he's also giving the simple believer the benefit of the doubt. If you enter into the Sufi way, in what Ibn Arabi is showing, then you have that advantage, where these rationalists, unless they go through a crisis of faith like Ghazali did when he, after which he wrote his Mughni min al-Dalal, unless they go through that crisis of faith, they're just completely stuck in their intellectual constructions.
So, so an example of that might be something like, you know, the image of the throne and the entire cosmos being inside of the throne, and then the four angels holding up the throne. And so that image is a revealed image. And so as an ordinary believer, I can bring it to mind and just kind of contemplate it. But the issue there then is that it was an image that was revealed at one point, and it's not animated, it's not living.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
And that understanding is very, very important. Then there's another layer to also that as well. That picture in a particular form itself is an example being given at a particular time. So, and it's being articulated to a group of people here on this boondocks of the cosmos, this are playing, so that they might understand it. I asked this question to my own sheikh one time, and he said, look, if you take an image like that and just contemplate it, and by contemplating that image over time, you then become open to untangling any kind of literalist understandings that you're imposing, that you're superimposing about that image. That image itself, that imaginal exercise, will get you and show you what it means by that image.
So are we talking about the throne, just to clarify?
Yeah. The image that was saying.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
Because it's just this week actually I saw that there was an article about similarities in near-death experiences. The throne is a very common feature, believe it or not. So it is still living actually, and people who weren't necessarily like when they see different images of heaven, so people can see cities and things like that, and the throne, a sort of elevated throne, is in the landscape is recurs quite a bit actually. So that's very interesting. Because I mean, I assume that, you know, one assumes that these aren't literal, you know, it's not like God needs to sit on a chair, you know, that these are symbols of mind, but they're still being employed or perceived.
Because that's the organ of the imagination that Ibn Arabi is putting his finger on, you know.
Yeah, it's like an interface, kind of.
Sure. But just remember, even in these sorts of unveilings and experiences in NDE, the argument can be made because the mind is detached from the sensible vehicle of the body, and it's not completely into the spirit world. At that point, it is, on one level, it has an advantage over being in a body because it is capable of now perceiving outside of the hudud, the parameters, the stricture of the sensual experience. So it can perceive by mind alone, pure mind alone. But yet, it is not fully in the spirit world. So whatever it is perceiving is still the imagination.
Yeah.
So these are theophanies. What it is experiencing are theophanies. In one sense, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is correct when it says these things. When the body detaches, when the mind detaches from the body at the point of death, all these various experiences of the lights and things that it sees, they are and are not the pure Buddha mind. They are and are not nirvana. So for an NDE experience, because these experiences have only gone so far into that terrain of the spirit world, they haven't got completely to the other side. They haven't dropped into beyond the border by which they're standing. One can make that argument that everything that is being perceived, including the whole life review and these, these salutary beings that show up that they think they're either Jesus or their family members or whatever. This is still the faculty of the imagination, capital I, the active imagination. It's not a brain process as like most of, modern neurology is claiming about a lot of these.
No, because the brain is often totally inactive.
Yeah.
It's flat.
A lot of these people are also pronounced, brain dead at that point. So what that organ of the active imagination is activating. This is how I've taken a lot of these accounts of the NDEs, because Some of the elements that they describe are also things that I have experienced and met in very deep meditative states.
Yeah.
Detached from the body, and tunnels, and voices, and lights, and that. I have experienced these things in my own meditative experiences, outside of any entheogenic or psychedelic experience, just deep.
Yeah, well, that's the barzakh that can be visited during meditation.
Yes.
Rather than you have to die. And it seems that the level of mind or perception that one is at is reflected in those experiences.
Yes.
And the language one has. And one is not enlightened, so one's still in the human realm of mind. So he's going to be using I guess that's what interests me about the fu'ad, is whether or not that can be something that doesn't even remain in human incarnation, in human manifestation.
That's an interesting question. I think kind of in a roundabout sort of way, maybe not with Ibn Arabi, but in the Shaykhi school, for the maqam al-fu'ad, the station of the blaze plug, the station of the heart, is equated with wujud, with being, existence itself. So that is the highest station that a given Gnostic in that particular tariqah can attain, is to attain the maqam al-fu'ad, which is equivalent to existence itself. So if you have attained the station of the blaze flux, you have attained the station of being, existence.
Being rather than thinking, or
exist, the wujud. You're in the plane of wujud itself.
But do you understand the distinction I'm trying to get to there?
So implicitly, and this is where I'm saying that, despite all the brouhaha between the Sheikhis and the Akbarians, that there's a lot in what Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsa'i himself is articulating in his philosophical text that echoes what Ibn Arabi is saying. So what Ibn Arabi means by taqallub, and how the faculty of transformation, which is associated with the qalb, the heart, is equivalent to what Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsa'i is saying when he's talking about the maqam al-fu'ad, the station of the blaze flux, or station of the heart, which is the highest of the stations. Because at that station, at that level, the same things are going on. What Ibn Arabi describes in the Fusus is what Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsa'i is then saying throughout his various treatises in the Jawami al-Kalim, when he's describing the state and what it looks like. And that maqam al-fuad, the station of the heart, is also equivalent in the Shaykhi cosmology, or the Shaykhi pneumatology, with maqam al-bayan, the station of the bayan, or the station of the enumeration.
It's reminding me of the Hindu, the three, where the first stage is just being, and then the next one's consciousness, like becoming aware, and then the last one is bliss. Bliss. Right. So it's love. Would you describe it as a state of, or I don't know, love is the right word in English?
If we equate wujud, if we equate existence, being, with love, which is one of the tropes that many of the Sufis do throughout their poetry, yes, we can do that, absolutely. Especially since we have that hadith Qudsi, which is, constantly reoccurring in this text and in other texts of Ibn Arabi. I was a hidden treasure, and I desired or loved, ahbabtu, to be known, therefore I created creation in order to be known. So that the impulse of creation by its creator is the love to know itself, or the love to be known as itself, as other.
Or the bliss of knowing oneself. I find bliss more helpful in this situation, because love has those connotations of having an object.
Yeah.
Well, whereas bliss is a state of being.
But Ibn Arabi is saying that that object is present, and that object is deliberately being generated by the real, as a means of self-contemplation. Such that that's the explanation for duality in the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi, that it's God deliberately creating an other to contemplate itself, and this other is the mirror, and the mirror is the universe. al-Kawn.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Jeff.
SubhanAllah.
I'm still tripping over the concepts, the greatest name, what is it again? I forget, but the misguider, what is that name again?
Al-Mudil. Yeah, Al-Mudil. Yeah.
I'm still
Devil was the
tripping over that.
manifestation of the name, the misguided. That's a very standard Akbarian trope. Yeah.
I like it. I'm still thinking in the context of your fatwa against
Yeah.
Andrew Tate, and like, okay, I'm just trying to figure out the logic, because there is kind of a illogical situation then. I mean, if on the one hand you're manifesting one name and he's manifesting another name and you're calling him out and punishing him, like, you know what I mean? Like, that does raise a million questions. Like, well,
Good.
so that's all I wanted to say. I don't know if I made any sense there, but you got me a little
Yeah.
confused.
Well, that was also deliberate, but nowhere did I say in the text of the fatwa that he is not a Muslim. I said he is not a believer. Very different, because number one, contrary to what all of even a lot of these Salafis and whatnot they believe, with me and as with Ibn Arabi, Islam is not a condition that you either enter or leave. It's a condition, it is an already always. The whole of creation is mustaslim. It is, submitted to being, to God at all times. This is why this whole concept of reverting that in the English language is used about people who, make that shahada, I find it a little bit distasteful because it just doesn't explain it. And the Quran itself has a very interesting dialectic in describing what it is conveying. And on the one hand, it talks about the Din al-Haq, the true religion. Then it talks about Islam, but Islam from a grammatical perspective should be a noun, not a noun, but a verb. And then once one reads those verses of the Quran where Islam is given a definite article to function as a noun, then one unpacks that verse and one still espies that the text itself is deliberately nominifying a verb. And so there is, through the grammar of the text, the subtle grammar of the text, which is kind of stuff that Ibn Arabi does quite often, one begins to see that even the self-understanding of the Quran itself is as something else. We're not talking about a name, a product, a brand, right? This is not what the book is talking about. It has been taken that way. It has been taken as an identity, but that's not what the revelation itself is talking about. So I didn't say that Andrew Tate has left Islam because I don't believe he's ever left or even entered everything. If he exists, he's mustaslim, he's a Muslim. But he can't, but being a believer, a mu'min, or a ghayr mu'min, other than a believer, these are things that one can very much from this position make rulings about. And I don't need a degree from some institution like Al-Azhar or Najaf to be able to make that distinction. What is very interesting to me is that when you have these Salafists and Wahhabis having a hissy fit about someone like me, a completely heterodox figure like me doing this, they themselves are committing a big faux pas, because in the Quran, it is very, very, very explicit that a true believer, and it uses mu'min, has a duty to enjoin the good and to denounce evil. Amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar. So if they are questioning me, they are questioning the Quran, because the Quran is saying that, someone who is on the straight path, if they see somebody doing something wrong, the wrong approach is to put your head in the sand and follow the crowd about what they're doing. The real moment, the true believer, is one who sticks their head out from the crowd and says, hey, stop doing that. And if the guy doesn't listen, then you make a determination, you make a call about the position in which this person is occupied. I never said in my fatwa he's a non-Muslim. How can I say that? I'm saying everything is Muslimed. So I can't claim that for him, but I can claim whether he's a believer or a non-believer, because a believer does not act does not behave in the manner that Mr. Andrew Tate is behaving. And that doesn't matter whether he's behaving this way towards Muslims. In this particular context, it was the Muslims, but previously it was with women. The guy's a convicted sex trafficker, and he's about to be convicted by the Romanian High Court to that end, without any possibility of getting out of that case. So, you show me, oh, you Salafists and Wahhabis, where in your hadith, where in the Quran, this sort of behavior is sanctioned behavior of a true believer, of a mu'min. Once we get the Islam question out of the equation, because of the definition of what I believe Islam means, once we get that out of the picture, then these people need to come and justify themselves. And so what I'm also doing by issuing a fatwa like that, I am also questioning the authority of institutions such as Al-Azhar in Cairo, or their own equivalent as institutions in Riyadh or Jeddah or whatever. And simultaneously, I am also questioning the authority of Qom and Najaf to be only the sole arbitrators of being able to make juridical judgments about the behavior of certain individuals that stand out. This guy himself put himself out there, right? He's the one who's amassed all these fans and etc., right? So what did these Salafi bros expect? That no one should criticize their brother because his brother is stepping out of line? And then the question is turned to them, why are they not doing it? Why are they not enjoining the good and denouncing the evil in the behavior of this chump sitting in Romania and pontificating on events that are occurring in England that he has no business commenting on?
I'm surprised. It's very surprising that they would, like, if you're going to choose a side, that they would choose to take his side, his defense, over yours. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
It makes perfect sense when you look at it from the perspective of the politicized terrain of social media at the time and the interests and actors behind each of these guys. The Gulf Arabs, and particularly the Saudis, for some reason think that it's a good idea to ally themselves with the European far right. There's a lot of subtext to this, and one of the subtexts to this is that the Gulf Arabs and the Saudis and the Emiratis in particular have completely aligned with the Zionists, right? So the interests of these Gulf Arab royalties and ruling classes and ruling families is now completely aligned with that of, like, they're very similar to the Hashemites of Jordan. And so they want to preserve the Zionist entity because it is in their commercial and their financial interest to do so. Whereas the Muslim community in Britain and through much of Europe has been at the forefront of the protests against the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians by the Zionist war machine. And so these kind of figures like Andrew Tate and Tommy Robinson and all very similar ones like them are very convenient ploys of divide and conquer, right? But the good thing about this situation and what we saw in the last 2 weeks is that these people have now really stepped into dog poo-poo, because a lot of people now understand the game that is being played, and that even a lot of these faces that are sitting in the UK or are sitting in Romania, etc., all these various social influencers are frauds. They're just basically paid crowdmongers and nothing else, right? So when someone like me comes from the kind of perspective that I'm articulating, and I issue a fatwa, these people, the ones behind these guys get, just lose their minds, because I'm also calling them out.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. Thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
Because I don't really know. I don't have much knowledge of the behind the scenes politics in that corner of the world. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you think it's more it's also like a territorial gatekeeping,
100%.
pissing on my thing, for you?
100%. 100%. Yes, absolutely. 100%. But I don't, I have no respect for any of these gatekeepers. I have no respect for the gatekeeping coming from the Western Ivory Tower. over these subjects. I have no respect for the gatekeeping that is coming out of the Muslim world itself, whether it be in Al-Azhar or whether it be in Qom and Najaf. I am not beholden to any of these people. So why should I respect it? My authority is Allah subhanahu, period. And the Imam and the Prophet and the Imams, you know, and the awliya, the totality of the, like Ibn Arabi. It's not Qom or Najaf, it's not Sistani or some other figure, etc. Those are my authorities.
Yeah.
Sidi, if
Go for it.
allow me to ask some questions. So let's return for third time to the question of the Taklid. So the ayah, because I think the Shaykh is commenting the ayah إن في ذلك لذكر لمن كان له قلب أو ألقى السمع وهو شهيد, that there is remembering or realization for the people who have a qalb,
Yes.
or for the people who turned completely their listening as if they are
Yes.
present to what
Yes.
is said.
Yes.
So the people with the heart, they're the Sufis, the people of Suluk who have the direct experience. The second group, the believer who is Mukallid, he is the one who is turning his listening to the awliya, but he is listening so attentively to them as he were present at what they are explaining
Yes.
to him. And here, where is the faculty of imagination, khayal, which Sheikh Muhyiddin says about, that they are so attentive to the words of prophets and the words of the Gnostic that they are capable to see by their imagination what the prophets and awliya has experienced directly, and that is the reasons they are higher station that
Then
the naked rationalist, if we say, because they are not capable to would you agree with
Sure,
this kind of
that what you just said is also true. See, this is the thing with Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi, when he says it, makes a statement, especially in the Fusus al-Hikam, and particularly in the Fusus al-Hikam, he means several different things by it simultaneously, and these several meanings, in the way that he phrases it, always jump out. On the one hand, what you say is right, because the believers, the simple believers, are giving ear to the awliya and the anbiya. But by the same token, they are still not at the level of the awliya or the muhakkikun, the verifiers, like Ibn Arabi is. So they're not quite there, but they are still one step above that of these rationalists and theologians from the perspective of Ibn Arabi, because they're not, their minds are not completely locked by these fabricated intellectual constructs. Nevertheless, because of their taqlid, they're still kind of at a much lower level than the people of the path, let alone the verifiers, because their content of belief, although not completely not completely of the form that is these intellectuals, yet is closer to these gods created in the beliefs, because the verifier, by virtue of the faculty of their imagination, has ascended to the level of the ability to see the complete vacuousness of these dogmatic gods created in belief, right? Whereas the simple believer, because of their taqlid, because of their emulation and their incapability of moving beyond that, unless they come into the path, are not there yet. They're still doing taqlid. They're still more, but their station is a little bit better than these intellectuals. Yeah. And plus, their position maintains sidq, something that Ibn Arabi does not say, but imputes very strongly in that passage. Their position is that of a simple believer holds sincerity, whereas with these intellectuals, because they are constantly jumping from one intellectual category to another, and also because a lot of times the exercises between themselves become exercises of intellectual one-upmanship. What Ibn Arabi is implying is that these other guys don't have the sidq. They don't have that honesty, that sincerity that the sincere believer has. But yet, in some sense, they're also equal as compared to the Sufis with dhawq.
Okay. Okay, before forgetting the next thing, when you said about your question to your sheikh about the images, the amthal which are in the Quran, and how to contemplate upon them, because we have lost much of the context in which they were present, to elaborate little more. So what I understood from your words, if we even if we take the image literally with the lost text as an entry point, if we allow to it to reveal itself in whatever it will reveal itself in the process, if we are not so stubborn to be literalist to what is said by the letter.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, and then when it does reveal itself, to then allow the full faculties of the fuad, the qalb, the mind, all of these synesthetically, to both unpack the literal element of the image, and then also then to have the inner elements of the image to reveal its truth about itself constantly to you. This is also one of the reasons in certain traditions, like in Hinduism and Buddhism, icons or certain forms of the gods are contemplated, not because of the form in itself, but because they want the mind, the novice, the adept, to start unpacking, to have the truth behind what these images are conveying, to reveal themselves slowly and more and more and more and more to the seeker on that path. For me, this particular exercise, which was the very last instruction he gave me, this particular exercise came in the form of that symbol of the greatest name. That was the last instruction, that I was to contemplate only that image from that point onwards and allow it to guide me. And he didn't give any other instruction. He said, I'm not going to tell you anything else. Just contemplate this image. Let it be your teacher from here on out. It will disclose and reveal its truth to you and tell you where to go. And it did. So it's basically the same thing. Yeah. I can't hear you. Your mic is off.
So can we say, you say it about the greatest name, but in some sense, every name of Allah Ta'ala, we can use it as an icon by which to reach the divine.
Yes.
Okay. And one more question. Okay, again to the trio which is oftenly mentioned in the Quran, as-sama wal-basar wal-fu'ad. For example, in the-sama wal-basar wal-fu'ad, and so on. Continuous the ayat in the different places. If I remember to take it little bit from Ismaili perspective, which Nasiri Khusro, if I remember, when he explains about them, maybe it is natural for Ismailis, but they are putting the people of rational intellect degree higher than
Yeah.
the Mukallids.
Yeah.
The people of Basra than the people of Sama, but
Yeah.
at the top they agree that the people of Kashf, they are the highest.
Highest.
That in some sense, by the Sama, we are experience reality by hearing. We are experience the world by what other people say to us.
Yes.
By the Basar, the seeing, we are, this is the level of intellect because we are experiencing the world by what we directly understand from the world, the present, excuse me, by the hearing we experience the past. Because we know about the past by what we hear, the historical narration. By the Besser, we are experiencing the present because we see what happens in the present. And the third level, by the Fuat, when you connect the previous two, you will be able to see the future by
Yes.
the
Mhm. So what is the question?
Here, okay, I'm sorry, I cannot formulate it. Difficult for me to put it in English words.
The the way the Ismailis, and you mentioned Nasser Khosrow. Nasser Khosrow's in his Jamia Hikmatain, it's a wonderful treatise. It's sort of is the final epitome of all of his thought. He lays this all out in a very similar term. But yeah, I mean, he in a sense is with al-Farabi and that whole tradition where on the one hand, although he doesn't instance the Quran, he says the simple believers. The simple believers believe of the Quran in something amounting to a philosophy for dummies, right? When they entered the Talim of the Ismailis, as Nasser puts it, as they move into by expanding the rational intellect and learning, the sciences and philosophy, etc., then they glean more information. But once they come out of the other end at the process of, which is equivalent to the complete Talim, that Quran which they took at the that they would have taken in their philosophical phase as being philosophy for dummies now becomes the acme of all wisdom, right? But because of the contexts, the intellectual and the theosophical context of the Ismaili Ta'lim, of the Ismaili doctrine, they are able to then read the Quran from that kind of, that kind of theosophical perspective. I don't think Ibn Arabi, he would maybe quibble a little bit with the way that Nasser Khosrow may be formulating this. But I think ultimately the intention between what Nasser Khosrow is saying and what Ibn Arabi is intending is not all that different. Their process is a little bit different because Nasser Khosrow is admitting that this intellectual ratiocinative process is an important part of the whole initiatic doctrine. It's not the end of it. But it's
yes, that was exactly the
Yeah.
question, what you
Yeah.
were saying at the moment. That from their perspective, the rational process is important to go
Yeah.
to the higher. And the difference that here the Sheikh said that when you unlock your khayal, you will connect directly. That was the point I wanted you to.
This is just you find this amongst a lot of the Sufis, and Ibn Arabi is articulating this, echoing it. Although then the question arises because Ibn Arabi himself is obviously very, very well versed in philosophy, in both in its Avicennan form and also in the form that it appeared in Andalusia in the school of Almeria. He knows this, right? So then it kind of begs the question, well, then, are you not contradicting yourself? Because you obviously yourself have gone through this process of learning these intellectual texts. And the answer is something approximating to what I just said about Nasser Khosrow, is that Ibn Arabi is not saying, keep away from this at all, as compared to some Sufis would just shun the teaching and learning of philosophy at all. What Ibn Arabi is saying is that, yeah, go ahead and read all of this stuff as much as you want, but understand its limitations. Understand that it's not giving you the full picture, and don't get lost in the intellectual categories. If you get lost in the intellectual categories, then that's the problem. That's when all the veils go up. And that in itself, based on that paragraph that we read, is where the simple believer is at an advantage. Doesn't mean that they are at a higher stage of understanding, but at an advantage to these rationalists and theologians. Because where these intellectuals are incapable, and sometimes they have impeded their own mind and hearts from entering a genuine initiatic path because of, just compounding so many intellectual concepts into their own mind rather than purifying themselves. The believer has very little intellectual context to contend with. So it's very easy. They're like, the dough that you can make any kind of bread out of. So if possible, if they go into the Sufi path, then rather than have to contend with all these intellectual concepts that you need to deconstruct out of their mind, they very swiftly enter into the realm of the imagination, which is a very important part of the path for the Sufi. But I don't think ultimately Ibn Arabi would disagree with Nasser Khosrow at all. I don't think he would disagree.
Thank you very much, Sid. You felt what I wanted to ask, even
problem.
I was not able to put the
No
question
problem.
properly.
No problem. No problem. No problem. Anybody else? Folks, we've gone over an hour and 30 minutes. Let's call it a wraps for this session. So next week, we're going to do the chapter of Lot. This is a short chapter. It's a relatively okay chapter of the book, and we will have reached our halfway mark as of next week. Zikr is obviously the zikr of Ya Malaku, O Master, or O Sovereign, or O King, whatever meaning one extracts from this. And we'll leave it there until next week. Everybody have a good week until next time. Ya Muqallim.